Bogland, for T.P. Flanagan. We have no prairies to slice a big sun at evening. Everywhere the eye concedes to encroaching horizon is wooed into the cyclops eye of a tarn. Our unfenced country is bog that keeps crusting between the sights of the sun. They've taken the skeleton of the great Irish elk out of the peat, set it up, an astounding crate full of air. Butter sunk under more than 100 years was recovered salty and white. The ground itself is kind black butter, melting and opening underfoot, missing its last definition by millions of years. They'll never dig coal here, only the waterlogged trunks of great firs, soft as pulp. Our pioneers keep striking inwards and downwards. Every layer they strip seems camped on before. The bog holes might be Atlantic seepage. The wet centre is bottomless. Okay, so this is a poem about the Irish bogs. Starts off describing the prairies. Now we're talking there, America. And in America you would have these great wide grasslands, and you would see, and I've tried to show it here, the sun would be rising up and the prairie, the horizon would literally slice the sun in two in the evening time. And that's what he's trying to get across there. In Ireland, it's not the case, because everywhere in Ireland you have mountains, and every edge there's a mountain, which basically is the encroaching horizon, encroaching in the sense of something coming closer to us. And everywhere you look, our eye is wooed into a tarn. Now this is a tarn here. It's a mountain glacial lake left behind after glaciers. He describes that as the Cyclops eye. Cyclops, very interesting mythological creatures, but he's hinting at the mythology of things past, things distant, things that we can't know particularly well. And this is a poem about the past and delving into the past. Like the prairies, our country is also unfenced. There's no need for our country to be fenced. We are an island. But he mentions here the crusting. Is bog that keeps crusting between the sights of the sun. And it's this idea, the sun rises, it scorches the bog, and it forms a crust, and it forms a layer, and then it keeps doing this night after night, day after day, century after century, and the bog grows in layers. So you get this sense of the yearly passing of time and the bog, but definitely layers of the bog, and I'll come to that later. And hidden under the crust are these amazing finds. Now, similar to the poem Holland Man that we did in class recently, there are things under there. One of them is the great Irish elk, and he uses a brilliant metaphor here, an astounding crate full of air. A photograph of it here, and I like this photograph because it has a picture of a man for scale. An astounding crate of air. Well, I think you can see why that works. As well as that, butter sunk under more than 100 years was recovered salty and white. So you can find, they do find every so often butter and cheese. Now there's an example there. Apparently it's still edible, perfectly preserved, much like the Holland Man, and you can find this underneath the peat. He describes the ground itself is kind black butter melting and opening underfoot. This is butter that is soft and yielding. Missing its last definition. Well, the origin of bogs is vegetation that sinks into the bog, and it basically decomposes into the wet, peaty marshland. That's what turf is. It's decomposed, partially decomposed vegetation from thousands of years ago. Give it longer, it'll turn into coal. But he says it'll never happen here. Millions of years ago, there would have been trees and firs and oak here, but now it's just this soft brown butter, if you want to put it that way. What they do drag out are the waterlogged trunks of great firs, soft as pulp. this line here, the waterlogged trunks of great firs, soft as pulp. It gives the contrast. A fir, of course, is not soft as pulp, but when they pull them out of the bog, the decomposition and the change that's taken place, that's what he means there. In the prairies, you would know if you ever watched any cowboy films, the pioneers kept going westwards looking for somewhere to live. But our pioneers are the ones who are the peat cutters and the people who work in the bog. They keep going down and down and down. And the further down you go, the more you uncover. Every layer they strip seems camped on before. So every time they go down, they find something. There's an image here. Oh, there's some of the, I think that's oak, not fir, but you get the idea. That's the kind of thing they pull out, and it's all stained, this gorgeous dark colour. This is the idea. Every layer that they strip back, they find some sort of encampment. Somebody has lived here. We don't know too much about them. All we can do is piece together, bit by bit, the type of people they might have been, the settlement, their traditions, etc., from what we can find in the bog as we go down and down and down. And the final line there, the bog holes might be Atlantic seepage. The wet centre is bottomless. There's an image here that might help with that. He's suggesting that the bog holes here, and you can see, just the water. He's suggesting perhaps that they go down forever. That there's no bottom to them, that actually it's the Atlantic coming up through the continent of Ireland, that Ireland is simply floating, and that the holes are the sea coming up through there, as opposed to being what they actually are, which is rainwater. This is where the poem can take a different turn, or a different interpretation, if you like, because just like in the poem The Forge, he's using the forge as a metaphor for poetry, you can also do the same thing with this one. And you can talk about the bog as being, and the wet centre of the bog as being the endless depths of imagination. There's a quote that I found in your notes, and it said this. This is a quote from Heaney. He says, "I have always listened for poems. They come sometimes like bodies out of a bog, almost complete, seeming to have been laid down a long time, surfacing with a touch of mystery." So he himself has used bogs as a source of inspiration, that what he's trying to say and what he's trying to get across, very often it's almost like something buried for thousands of years, and then the concept comes up almost fully formed, and he writes the poem based on that. So that is Bogland. Just if you want to talk about language, you get things here such as black butter, which is the use of alliteration. You also get that here, melting and missing. Making a mess of that, but you get the idea. Melting and missing, the two of them are there. There's also metaphor of things like the ground itself is kind black butter, the astounding crate of air, the cyclops eye. So there's plenty of creative techniques that he's using in this poem, and that is where we leave Bogland.